Welcome back, this is Chief Dugan continuing the guide on how to get started in World of Warcraft. We're in the middle of going through each of the classes. If you would, please watch the video before this one if you haven't seen it yet, because I explain a general overview of this of the classes. This one we're getting way more in depth, so let's get to it. Let's go into the warrior specializations first. The first warrior specialization is called Arms. It's a melee DPS specialization. They specialize in two-handed weaponry. They're extremely mobile, and they have a high amount of survivability. They have quite a few abilities and passive abilities that allow them to stay alive in combat on their own. So what that makes them, well, what I just said kind of contradicts what I said. Well, that sounds kind of like a mix between tank and damage. Yeah, it's kind of a hybrid thing. And what that makes them really good for, Arms Warriors, is it makes them really good at PvP. Usually those kind of hybrid things where it's, a class is really good at dealing damage and doing something, or a specialization is really good at dealing damage and maybe healing a little bit, that usually means they're really good at PvP, because that survivability is really important in PvP, because you're not always going to have a healer right behind you. So then you have the second specialization for Warrior is called Fury. This is also a melee DPS specialization. Fury Warriors are pretty much the ultimate berserkers, right? They dual wield two-handed weapons. So like at the end game you get axes that are a lot bigger and more impressive than this. Yeah, imagine wielding two of those. That's what's really cool about the Fury Warriors. The only class that gets to do that. And they do so much damage. Warriors in general, across all three specializations, Warrior the class is one of the strongest classes in the game right now, if not the strongest. I tend to believe that it's a little overpowered because they're so mobile. A lot of people don't expect them to be so mobile with all that plate heavy armor, but they just have so many abilities to close the distance that it's just really powerful, and they hit like trucks. The third specialization for the Warrior is Protection, okay, and that's the tank. Okay, so they basically do one-handed weapon and a shield, and they specialize in defensive abilities, especially like strong defensive cooldowns, right? Most tanks have strong defensive cooldowns. And what a cooldown is it's basically a spell that once you use it, you can't use it again for a certain amount of time, anywhere from like 5 to 6 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, all the way up to 3 to 5 minutes sometimes. So, the more powerful an ability, usually the longer the cooldown. And in terms of that, like once you start getting up into the 2-minute cooldown and the 3-minute cooldown stuff, those cooldowns tend to be more of like passive, like increases your something for like 20 seconds, and then, you can't use that again for a certain amount of time. Whereas most like attack cooldowns are usually shorter on the cooldowns, where like like paladins have a Crusader Strike, right, which is just a melee attack with holy energy. They can only use that once every few seconds. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's what a cooldown is. And tanks usually have a lot of them that are specialized in defense. Okay, so moving on to the next class, we have the Paladin. And as I said before, they can fill a lot of roles, and that's because their specializations allow them to do so. So the first specialization is Holy. They specialize in the holy energy aspect of their class, so that makes them healers, and they are extremely good at healing single targets. Of course, they can heal, just like every other class, they can heal multiple targets at the same time, but Paladins are really strong single target healers. They are currently the best, and kind of always have been the best single target healers. Really good at healing the tank, right? Because the tank is the one taking the most damage. The second specialization for Paladins is called Protection. It's just kind of like Protection Warrior. A Protection Paladin is a shield wielder that also uses kind of the divine energy to kind of enhance their own abilities. Like they get a really powerful ability called Avenger's Shield, where you kind of Captain America your shield with like sling it around with like holy energy, throw it and it comes back to you, that kind of thing. So that's something that's really interesting, because they also get to do some a little bit of healing in addition to tanking, just a little bit to kind of give them that extra survivability. And then the third specialization for Paladins is called Retribution. This is a melee DPS specialization, and they are pretty much like the ultimate Crusaders. That's what Retribution Paladins are. Two-handed weapon, bringing like Wrath of the Heavens down on their characters. Almost all of their abilities behave on cooldown, so that's something to keep in mind. And their abilities kind of all use mana, right? Whereas warriors use rage, which is the more they use abilities, the more stronger abilities they can use. And most magic users have mana, which is essentially just like magic ammo. You know, every spell and ability costs a certain amount of mana. And then, so let's just go on. We're going to talk about the Hunter. All three specializations that the Hunter has are ranged DPS, right? So let's talk about the first one. We got Beast Mastery. Beast Mastery Hunters really focus on their pet performance and different kind of abilities to synergize like what they do with their pets and that kind of thing. They even get some really cool abilities where they can kind of summon like all their pets at once that they've trained. I think it's called Stampede or Unleash the Hounds or something like that. I haven't played a Hunter at the end game, but it's just really cool when you get to see all those pets come out and just start wrecking face. The second specialization for Hunters is called Marksmanship. Marksmanship Hunters are basically the ranged weapon focus, right? So it's really all about your projectile attacks. So they can use bows, crossbows, guns. All Hunters can use bows, crossbows, and guns. And they, you know, this is pretty much like the Hawkeye of of like the archer idea. Like you have so many different kinds of arrow attacks, and you know, like you've got like a freezing thing, you've got like a explosive arrow, like explosive shot, like a poison shot, that kind of thing. It's a lot of fun. And then we've got Survival Hunter, which is kind of specializing in traps and trickery, more so than the actual projectile stuff. So I imagine that's for PvP. I'm not quite sure because I haven't played a Hunter at the end game. The end game just meaning whatever the level cap is. So like level 90 currently, that's the end game. Moving on to Rogue. All three specializations that the Rogue have, they're all melee DPS. So the first specialization is Assassination, and this is like dual wielding daggers with a lot of like poison focus. They do a lot of damage currently. The second specialization of Rogues is Combat. And this is pretty much like expert fighter, dual-wielding swords, just slicing and dicing, just being just uber epic dual-wielding swordsman, right? And then the third specialization for Rogues is Subtlety. And this is like a stealth kind of ambush style that I also would imagine is for PvP, because I haven't played a Rogue at the end game either. And I tend to stick with classes that are more mana-based. I just kind of like that. I've always been kind of a magic user. So what Rogues do to utilize their combat is they do like combo points. Like the more they attack an enemy with certain attacks, they build up these combo points that allow them to do these epic, like super, you know, like sword play finishing move kind of things. Whereas Hunters, they don't really use mana, they use focus, which is basically just behaves as mana but regenerates really fast and allows them to stay mobile. So Rogues use like energy and combo points. Priests use mana. Priests, that's what I play in the game, so I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth for Priest. But the first specialization for Priest is Holy, and this is a healing specialization, obviously. And they basically just have like a versatile... I think Holy Priests, it's safe to say, have probably the most healing spells in their arsenal. That doesn't necessarily make them better, but they just have a lot of variety, and they're really flexible in the type of healing that they can do. And they use mana, and they have these... really cool mechanics called chakras, which is kind of like they use like a combo. It's almost kind of like changing stance magically, so they can specialize in healing in different kinds of ways, more single target, more, you know, multi-target healing kind of thing. The second specialization for priests is called Discipline, and it's also a healer. So priests are the only class in the game that have two healing specializations, which is really kind of cool. And Discipline Priests, they specialize in more like barriers and like bubbles, like bubble magic, where they can put these little bubble shields on their allies and heal them that way through like absorption. So rather than being as much direct healing, it's more shielding, which when you think about it, still is kind of healing. If you have someone down at 50% health and you put a shield on them for 25% health, for that equals to 25% of their health, that's really like healing them for 25% of their health, because it's just going to negate that damage that comes in. Disciplined Priests are currently really strong. They're a little too strong. But that's what's great about this game, is Blizzard's kind of toning them back so that other healers, and then bringing the other healers up to maintain that balance. Blizzard is always tweaking the game to keep it fresh and interesting, and still maintaining balance between all the different like classes, so that one DPS class doesn't get too far above everybody else, and that one healing class doesn't get too far ahead. This third specialization for priests is called Shadow. This is a ranged DPS spec. And what's really cool, spec is, by the way, just short for specialization. So when you hear me say spec, that's what I'm talking about. The Shadow Priest spec is really cool because they get to enter like a shadow form where they become like dark and purple and black and kind of like smoky looking, and they're even a little transparent. And so that's really cool. It's easiest to notice a Shadow Priest in a lineup, right? Because they're like passed into the shadow realm. It looks really cool. And shadow magic, this is true for warlocks too, shadow magic tends to be a lot of dots, okay? And what dots are is damage over time spells, right? That's what dot stands for, damage over time. So, for instance, their basic dot is called Shadow Word Pain, okay? And Shadow Word Pain is basically an instant cast. It takes no time to cast it. Once you hit the button, it's on your target, and it lasts for, I think, like 16 to 20 seconds. So it doesn't do that much damage up front, but every couple seconds, it is doing damage. So if you can put that dot up on like 4 different guys, your damage really starts kind of increasing rapidly, right? So that's the dot mechanic, damage over time. So that's just an interesting concept. If you like the sound of dots, you'll definitely want to consider like a Shadow Priest or a Warlock, and I'll get more into Warlocks in a second. So Shamans, as I said, are like Elemental Masters. They have 3 different specializations, just like everybody else. The first one is ranged DPS. This is like a spellcaster with the elements. A lot of lightning spells, like chain lightning, you know, like striking a lightning bolt to one target and then it jumps to other targets, that kind of thing. So if you really like the elemental caster idea, Shamans may be the way to go for you. Elemental Shamans, that is. Their second DPS spec is called Enhancement, but this is a melee DPS. And this is kind of that battle mage I was talking about. This is the class that focuses on infusing their weapons with the elemental magic. So, like, you know, hitting your enemy with, like, a fiery weapon and then, like, that kind of thing. Like, that's what the Enhancement Shaman does. And then the third specialization for Shamans is called Restoration. This is their healing specializations, and this is basically where they heal allies with water magic and using like ancestral spirits to help them aid their allies. Resto Shamans are really good at AoE healing. That's multi-target healing. AoE stands for Area of Effect. So they have a spell called Healing Rain, which basically just for a pretty large area, it's about 15 yards in diameter, I would say. Anybody that stands in the Healing Rain will get healed, right? Their allies will get healed by it. The enemies won't. So Healing Rain is really powerful because if you have like 20 people standing in one Healing Rain, that shaman is really doing a lot of healing. So that's the concept of AoE, Area of Effect. And then, so there's like AoE damage as well, which I'll talk about in a second, but first I want to address the totems really quick, because I don't think I have yet. Totems are essentially just really powerful cooldowns, and they summon these little totems on the ground, and each race kind of gets their own totem, so that's something that's kind of cool when you play like a shaman. Different races have different totems, which is kind of cool. But basically what they do is they buff yourself and your allies, and what buff means, a buff is essentially a passive bonus that you give to other players. So, like, they have a buff, a totem called Healing Tide Totem, which is basically just something they put down, and it passively increases healing done, and it just heals everybody in the area, right? Where they have another totem that regenerates mana, right? And so every class kind of has, like, buffs, right? So priests have a buff that increases everybody's health. Paladins have buffs that increases kind of everybody's damage-dealing statistics and stats and stuff like that. So it's really good to have a lot of classes so you can utilize all these buffs, because if you have 5 shamans in a group, you're not going to be able to benefit from like 5 buffs that the shamans put out. They could still use their cooldowns and totems independently, that's great, but you want to kind of, you won't get to really benefit from those kind of buffs 5 times. So it's better to have one shaman, one paladin, etc. All these different classes have their own buff. So that's something that's kind of cool. So I just got done talking about AoE healing. Let's talk about AoE damage as we talk about the mage, because so we talked about that Healing Rain spell. Well, and most classes have like an equivalent of that. The mage's kind of AoE spell is called Blizzard. And basically it's the opposite of Healing Rain, except it's just giant like ice spikes come down from the sky and hit their targets, and everybody in that area takes that damage. So if you have a lot of enemies grouped together, that's when AoE damage starts coming into play. So the first specialization that I'm going to talk about for mages is Frost. And Frost is kind of specializing in that blizzard type idea. It's a lot of freezing your enemies, it's a lot of like shattering mechanics. And then what's really cool about it is Frost mages get their own pet. They get like a little ice elemental, a water elemental that'll follow them around and shoot frost bolts alongside them, which is something that's really cool. And mages and shamans, I know I didn't talk about it earlier, but mages and shamans utilize mana as well, so that magic ammo. The second specialization is called Fire, and it's basically, you know, just Pyromancer, all out, just fire spells and damage, and it's kind of cool. They do a little bit of AoE and a little bit of dots, not really much, but like, you know, when you cast like a giant, you know, fire spell on somebody, they're going to burn, and then it might combust, damaging allies around them. So that's kind of something, if that really sounds like something you'd want to play, that's kind of what the Fire Mage is like. The third specialization for mages is called Arcane, and Arcane mages are basically, like, Arcane magic is the purest form of magic in this game. It's like pure, like purple looking, raw magical power, right? Purpley blue, just arcane missiles. And it's just about hitting your enemy with powerful arcane magic projectiles, right? And what's cool about Arcane is they have like every time they cast a spell, they get this buff on them that increases the damage of their next spell, but also increases how much mana it costs. So there's this cool kind of mechanic of using different spells to build up that, and then once you get a certain amount of like that buff on you, because you're not going to be able to just keep doing it, you'll run out of mana, you can discharge it on yourself by shooting it at another character. So that's just like a kind of cool concept. Every single one of these classes has really cool mechanics like that. Moving on to the Warlock. The Warlock is really cool because it's like a mage that's gone Shadow. So as I said before, Shadow deals a lot with dots, and that's true for Warlocks as well. The first spec we're going to talk about for Warlocks is Affliction, and this specializes in pure Shadow magic, draining, a lot of like drain spells, like a life drain, that kind of thing. And then they also do a lot of dots. As I said before, this is kind of the specialization that is really more focused on dots than anything else in terms of the shadow dots. And then we have Demonology Warlocks is the second specialization. By the way, all of these are all range DPS. Same with the Mage, all range DPS. Demonology are specializers. They're kind of like Beast Mastery hunters, but they specialize in their demons, right? And they actually get a really cool ability that allows them to like metamorphosize into a giant like demon themselves, this shadow version of themselves that just makes them big and strong and almost like tanky melee kind of character, which is really interesting. And then there's the Destruction Warlock, which is basically just the master of hellfire, right? It's all about like just burning with fire. And what's really cool about this is in World of Warcraft, a lot of demonic stuff is referred to as Fel, F-E-L. And so they have a quest line that allows them to turn their fire spells into Felfire. It doesn't increase the damage or anything, but Felfire is green. So you see like this green fire on this imp, that makes that kind of Felfire. So it's cool, they get to actually turn all of these, it's really challenging to do, but they get to turn all of these fire spells into green Felfire, which is really nice. Moving on to the next class, we've got Monks, 3 different specializations here as well. The first specialization is called Brewmaster, and this is their tanking specialization. And so monks are kind of the martial arts experts with a little bit of, you know, the drunk friar type thing mixed in there. So Brewmasters are like drunken fist martial artists that allow them to use like unpredictable movements and evasion to kind of tank, which is really interesting. And they have a lot of like beer themed attacks, which sounds silly, but it works really well in the game. The second type of specialization we have for monks are called Mistweavers. These are the healers, and they use their martial expertise and like herbal knowledge to replenish the life force to their allies, right? A lot of like chi stuff, and as a matter of fact, that's what monks use as their like I'm trying to think of, like, instead of mana, they have chi and harmony, which is kind of like a mix between mana and combo points. It's pretty cool. It's not necessarily unique, but it's a cool like combination of mechanics that allow you to play the character in a certain way that I actually found really enjoyable. I'm leveling up a monk right now, and I can't even tell you how much I'm enjoying the monk. I'm so surprised, because a lot of people, when this class came out, it came out at the same time as the pandas. So a lot of people called Mists of Pandaria the Kung Fu Panda expansion, myself included. And I'm just so pleasantly surprised by like how good this expansion has been, and how cool the pandas are, and how cool the monk is. You know, once you get past that Kung Fu Panda thing in your head, that kind of stereotype that you have in your mind, like once I got past that, I loved that expansion so much. And it makes me really excited about this next expansion that Blizzard's doing. But moving on, we're going to talk about, oh, and I didn't finish the monks. Shame on me. So we just talked about the Mistweaver, the healing. The third specialization is a melee DPS called Windwalker. This is a Windwalker monk. And it's kind of cool. It's like, if you wanted to play like Ryu in an MMO, like this is totally the thing to do. Like, you know, they get some like, you know, really strong attacks. You know, they've got like the hurricane kick kind of thing. And they use like their bare hands a lot. Like, yeah, they'll use their weapons sometimes, but the majority of their attacks are all like hand to hand, which is, I think it's really refreshing, because no other class does that. Moving on to the Druid next. Druids are really cool because they're the only class in the game that has 4 specializations. And the first one is called Balance. So Balanced Druids are ranged DPS, and they're like spellcasters, and they can take on, you know, I talked about before, they can shapeshift into different animals. Well, they can shapeshift into this owl bear form, which in this game is called a moonkin. The slang for that is boomkin, because moonkins actually do a lot of like DPS in this game. Balanced Druids do. And they kind of use like a hybrid between like arcane and nature magic to just unleash epic like starfire and moonfire upon their enemies, and just really cool mechanic there. Balanced Druids are a lot of fun, despite the moonkin thing kind of seeming and looking a little odd. The next specialization for Druids is called Feral, and this is a melee DPS, and they take on like a wild cat form to like just basically pounce and shred enemies. And it's kind of behaves a lot like a rogue with like the combo system. But they do like a lot of melee dots by just shredding through their enemies, like melee damage over time abilities. And they get to go into stealth and everything, and the cats look great. Like each race has a different looking like animal. So like, you know, the Night Elves, they kind of look like a panther, the Worgans look more like a wolf, the Taurens look kind of like these mangy lions with horns, which are awesome, and the Trolls like are just super colorful with tusks, like kind of like a tiger panther with like just really interesting colors. I actually really like the way the troll druids look. And then, so let's move on. The third specialization for druids, this is the Guardian. So this is their tank. And they can all shapeshift into different like dire bear forms, these giant vicious bears. You know, so like the Night Elves, you know, and they all look different, you know, like the Worgans look kind of like a wolf bear. The Torrens bear has horns, etc. You know, you get that idea. And what's cool about them, they use evasion despite being this big bear. It's a lot of like agility tanking, similar to the monk. And it's just cool, just getting able to play like a unique thing like that, going into a raid with a bunch of dudes in epic armor and wizard robes and impressive weapons and staves and just stuff like that, or staves, whatever you want to call it, I don't care. It's just kind of cool, like going in there, yeah, I'm going to change into an animal and wreck. So that's really interesting. And the final specialization for druids is the healing specialization, which is called Restoration. Restoration druids used to like shapeshift into like a treant form. They can do it on cooldown now. And they basically just use nature energy, and they're kind of like to heal their allies, and they are the master of hots. So dot was damage over time, hot is healing over time. And most every single one of their spells has some kind of like hot mechanic about it. And so this is like not a lot of healing up front, but the amount of healing on multiple enemies once you get those hots rolling on multiple targets really adds up, which makes them one of the best healers in the game, which is just fantastic. I say one of the best healers in the game. That's really unfair for me to say, because there really isn't a best healer in the game, or a best DPS, or a best tank in the game. They all are good in their own situation. They're all great in every situation. Some of them are ridiculous in certain situations. So it just so happens that Discipline Priests are ridiculously good in most situations. Restoration Druids are really good on like fights where everybody's spread out and everybody's taking a lot of damage. But that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to clarify that. The final class is the Death Knight. Remember, this starts at level 55. And the first specialization we're going to talk about is the tank specialization, which is called Blood. And this is kind of like about corrupting life energy to protect themselves, like, you know, like using blood magic barriers, that kind of thing. It's and they don't use a shield, right? Which is kind of interesting. As a tank, you would expect them to. Death Knight's, I will go ahead and get this out of the way now. Death Knight's rune system is kind of like what they use for mana, right? Instead of mana, they use this kind of like, it's called runic power, right? They specialize in these rune weapons. And so they have this runic power that builds up as they use these different runes. And each ability costs a certain amount of like runes. It's kind of like using lands in Magic the Gathering, if you're familiar with that is. Like you have 2 blood runes, 2 frost runes, 2 unholy runes, and then you can get a death rune. So it makes it really complicated, but it also makes it a lot of fun. A lot of these most complicated classes, once you get them down, it really, the intricacies you start realizing that all these like intricate details about the class and utilizing them in the most efficient way, and all these different varieties of all these different powers. So I would say the rune system that the Death Knights use is probably the most complicated resource system in the game, but also I would argue one of the most rewarding. But that's neither here nor there. Let's go ahead and talk about the second specialization for Death Knights, which is a melee DPS specialization called Frost. Frost Death Knights are dual-wielding kind of berserkers, one-handed weapons, which, you know, these rune swords get their own enchantments, so dual-wielding is really cool. And it kind of like, that class focuses on like the cold of death, right? And a lot of like frost, just frost-themed melee class. And then the third specialization is Unholy. This is a melee DPS specialization as well. And this is kind of like the master of death and necromancy and like spreading plagues. I would say like the Unholy Death Knight is probably the closest thing to the Lich King, which is cool because the Lich King is this really awesome like bad guy that everybody loves and really popular character. And that pretty much covers it for all the specializations. A couple notes I want to make really quick. When you're starting your first character, go ahead and really think about playing as a DPS, just because tanks and healers in groups, there's fewer of them, so a lot more responsibility and pressure is put on them. And if you're a new player that isn't quite familiar with the game and you're a healer and you have a bad time, people are going to be like, well, why didn't you do this? And then you're going to say, well, I just didn't know to do that. And a lot of times people don't have the patience to put up with that, unfortunately. That's one thing I don't really like about the WoW community, is the patience is very little, even though they should really be considering, like, you know, everybody was new to it at some point. You know what I mean? Like, when I started playing, I had no frickin' clue what the hell I was doing, ever. And it took me sitting down with one guy one night and I'm like, dude, just tell me what to do, man. Like, I'm a smart dude, I'll figure it out. I need someone to educate me, because it's so vast to get into it. And that's what really motivated me to do these videos, is, you know, people aren't patient with players, and I want to be that patient guy that can help them. And best way to do that, level as a DPS first. Pick a DPS first. Because then by the time you hit 90, you'll have observed tanks and healers, and then you'll think, you know what, I could give that a shot. I got my first guy to 90, I'll level this, you know, and then I'll continue to work on the 90 and getting him all, like, this cool gear from the end game, and I'll see if I like the healing playstyle. That brings me to my second point that I want to make before I end this video. You should also consider being a druid, because druids are the only ones that can fill all the roles. Well, that's not true. Paladins can be tank, healers, deeps, DPS, and druids can be tank, healers, deeps, along with monks, and yeah, I think that's it. But what my point is here is they're the only one that can do range DPS, melee DPS, tanking, and healing, because they have those 4 specializations. So let's say you're like playing a mage, right? This is a problem that you might run into. If you play a mage and you get to the end game and you're like, man, I really don't like this magic playstyle from range. I really just want to play melee and get in their face. You know, I think I may enjoy that more. Well, if you're a mage, you're going to have to create a new character to do that. Whereas if you're a druid, you'll, like, let's say you're a moonkin, which is a ranged spellcasting DPS, and you want to go melee, well, you just change your specialization to feral to become the cat and go in and wreck people's face. And changing specializations is a big deal. Like, it takes a lot of time to get your gear right, you know, because agility is more important to a cat than a boomkin, where a boomkin is going to end up using intellect on their armor. And I'll get into all that stuff later, but changing specialization is a lot easier than just making a new character. So that's why I think every first player should really consider being a druid and being a DPS player, to just make your experience simple and enjoyable and fast, and you'll be able to learn the most quickly that way, in my opinion. So I think that's going to do it. Just about covers everything. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, subscribe, right? Because everybody has to ask for that on YouTube nowadays. And I really hope something spoke to you. Something about one of these specializations or these classes was like, man, that sounds pretty cool. And if you have like questions about that sort of thing, look up a YouTube guide that focuses on one of those classes, right? That focuses on like the mechanics of one of those classes, like why Windwalker Monk is awesome or something like that. Because there are a lot of those videos of people who are passionate about their classes that want to play, that want to show why their class is so much fun to play. So thank you guys. Please comment on the feedback. I know the quality of my videos is a little rough to start, but I studied this stuff in school, so it should be getting pretty good here in a little bit. I feel embarrassed, but thank you guys. I'll see you in the next one.